The fourth basic fear is that of fear of loss of love of someone. The source from which this fear originated needs but little description, for it is obvious that it grew out of man's nature to steal his fellow man's mate, or at least to take liberties with her, unknown to her rightful lord and master. By nature all men are polygamous, the statement of a truth which will, of course, bring denials from those who are either too old to function in a normal way sexually, or have, from some other cause, lost the contents of certain glands which are responsible for man's tendency toward the plurality of the opposite sex. There can be but little doubt that jealousy and all other similar forms of more or less mild dementia praecox, insanity, grew out of man's inherited fear of the loss of love of someone. Of all the sane fools studied by this author, that represented by a man who has become jealous of some woman, or that of a woman who has become jealous of some man, is the oddest and strangest. The author, fortunately, never had but one case of personal experience with this form of insanity, but from that experience he learned enough to justify him in stating that the fear of the loss of love of someone is one of the most painful, if not in fact the most painful, of all the 6 basic fears. And it seems reasonable to add that this fear plays more havoc with the human mind than do any of the other 6 basic fears, often leading to the more violent forms of permanent insanity. The 5th basic fear is that of the fear of ill health. This fear has its origin, to considerable extent also, in the same sources from which the fears of poverty and old age are derived. The fear of ill health must needs be closely associated with both poverty and old age, because it also leads toward the borderline of terrible worlds of which man knows not, but of which he has heard some discomforting stories. The author strongly suggests that those engaged in the business of selling good health methods have had considerable to do with keeping the fear of ill health alive in the human mind. For longer than the record of the human race can be relied upon, the world has known of various and sundry forms of therapy and health purveyors. If a man gains his living from keeping people in good health, it seems but natural that he would use every means at his command for persuading people that they needed his services. Thus, in time, it might be that people would inherit a fear of ill health. The 6th and last of the 6 basic fears is that of the fear of death. To many, this is the worst of all the 6 basic fears, and the reason why it is so regarded becomes obvious to even the casual student of psychology. The terrible pangs of fear associated with death may be charged directly to religious fanaticism, the source which is more responsible for it than are all other sources combined. So-called heathen are not as much afraid of death as are the civilized, especially that portion of the civilized population which has come under the influence of theology. For hundreds of millions of years, man has been asking the still unanswered, and it may be the unanswerable, questions, whence and whither? Where did I come from, and where am I going after death? The more cunning and crafty, as well as the honest but credulous of the race, have not been slow to offer the answer to these questions. In fact, the answering of these questions has become one of the so-called learned professions, despite the fact that but little learning is required to enter this profession. Witness now the major source of origin of the fear of death. Come into my tent, embrace my faith, accept my dogmas, and pay my salary, and I will give you a ticket that will admit you straightway into heaven when you die, says the leader of one form of sectarianism. Remain out of my tent, says this same leader, and you will go directly to hell, where you will burn throughout eternity. While in fact the self-appointed leader may not be able to provide safe conduct into heaven, nor by lack of such provision allow the unfortunate seeker after truth to descend into hell, the possibility of the latter seems so terrible that it lays hold of the mind and creates that fear of fears, the fear of death. In truth, no man knows, and no man has ever known what heaven or hell is like, or if such places exist, and this very lack of definite knowledge opens the door of the human mind to the charlatan to enter and control that mind with his stock of legerdemain and various brands of trickery, deceit, and fraud. The truth is this, nothing less and nothing more, that no man knows, nor has any man ever known, where we come from at birth or where we go at death. Any person claiming otherwise is either deceiving himself or he is a conscious impostor who makes it a business to live without rendering service of value through play upon the credulity of humanity. Be it said in their behalf, however, the majority of those engaged in selling tickets into heaven actually believe not only that they know where heaven exists, but that their creeds and formulas will give safe passage to all who embrace them. This belief can be summed up in one word: credulity. Religious leaders generally make the broad, sweeping claim that the present civilization owes its existence to the work done by the churches. This author, as far as he is personally concerned, is willing to grant their claims to be correct, if at the same time he be permitted to add that even if this claim be true, the theologians haven't a great deal of which to brag. But it is not, cannot be true that civilization has grown out of the efforts of the organized churches and creeds, if by the term civilization is meant the uncovering of the natural laws and the many inventions to which the world is the present heir. If the theologians wish to claim that part of civilization which has to do with man's conduct toward his fellow man, they are perfectly welcome to it, as far as this author is concerned. But on the other hand, if they presume to gobble up the credit for all the scientific discovery of mankind, the author begs leave to offer vigorous protest. It is hardly sufficient to state that social heredity is the method through which man gathers all knowledge that reaches him through the five senses. It is more to the point to state how social heredity works, in as many different applications as will give the student a comprehensive understanding of that law. Let us begin with some of the lower forms of animal life and examine the manner in which they are affected by the law of social heredity. Shortly after this author began to examine the major sources from which men gather the knowledge which makes them what they are, some 30-odd years ago, he discovered the nest of a ruffed grouse. The nest was so located that the mother bird could be seen from a considerable distance when she was on the nest. With the aid of a pair of field glasses, the bird was closely watched until the young birds were hatched out. It happened that the regular daily observation was made but a few hours after the young birds came out of the shell. Desiring to know what would happen, the author approached the nest. The mother bird remained nearby until the intruder was within 10 or 12 feet of her. Then she disarranged her feathers, stretched one wing over her leg, and went hobbling away, making a pretense of being crippled. Being somewhat familiar with the tricks of mother birds, the author did not follow, but instead went to the nest to take a look at the little ones. Without the slightest signs of fear, they turned their eyes toward him, moving their heads first one way and then another. He reached down and picked one of them up. With no signs of fear, it stood in the palm of his hand. He laid the bird back in the nest and went away to a safe distance to give the mother bird a chance to return. The wait was short. Very soon she began cautiously to edge her way back toward the nest until she was within a few feet of it, when she spread her wings and ran as fast as she could, uttering, meanwhile, a series of sounds similar to those of a hen when she has found some morsel of food and wishes to call her brood to partake of it. She gathered the little birds around and continued to quiver in a highly excited manner, shaking her wings and ruffling her feathers. One could almost hear her words as she gave the little birds their first lesson in self-defense through the law of social heredity. "You silly little creatures, do you not know that men are your enemies? Shame on you for allowing that man to pick you up in his hands. It's a wonder he didn't carry you off and eat you alive. The next time you see a man approaching, make yourselves scarce. Lie down on the ground, run under leaves, go anywhere to get out of sight, and remain out of sight until the enemy is well on his way." The little birds stood around and listened to the lecture with intense interest. After the mother bird had quieted down, the author again started to approach the nest. When within 20 feet or so of the guarded household, the mother bird again started to lead him in the other direction by crumpling up her wing and hobbling along as if she were crippled. He looked at the nest, but the glance was in vain. The little birds were nowhere to be found. They had learned rapidly to avoid their natural enemy, thanks to their natural instinct. Again the author retreated, awaited until the mother bird had reassembled her household, then came out to visit them, but with similar results. When he approached the spot where he last saw the mother bird, not the slightest signs of the little fellows were to be found.